Hey, Margie here. How's your energy? Do you feel fatigued or that you just don't have the energy that you used to? Or that it would be nice to have a little more energy so you can live life to its fullest? Well, the good news is we're going to talk about energy today because all of this is possible. And we're going to discuss tools to increase your energy. And our special guest is Ari Whitten. And Ari is the founder of the Energy Blueprint System, a comprehensive lifestyle and supplement program which has helped more than 2 million people and counting experience optimal health, better performance, and more energy. He's also the best-selling author of The Ultimate Guide to Red Light Therapy and his most recent book, Eat for Energy, and the host of the popular The Energy Blueprint podcast, which features the world's leading natural health experts. He's also hosting the upcoming Superhuman Energy Summit. And for more than 25 years, Ari has been dedicated to the study of human health science. He holds a Master of Science in Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine, a Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology, and has completed all the coursework for Clinical Psychology Ph.D. In today's talk, Ari focuses on energy, and he gives us some great strategies we can all use to have more energy. So, this talk is filled with lots of great information. So, stay tuned. Welcome, Ari. I'm really happy to have you here on the podcast. This topic is so important because so many people are walking around just wishing they had more energy to enjoy life. And I'm excited because what you're going to talk about really works and it's really effective, and I know can change lives. So, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Margie. And I completely agree with everything you said.
So, let's just start off at the beginning. And well, you know what? Even before we start off, why don't you just give us the backstory, how you became such an expert in energy and fatigue, and why you even how you got involved with all this because you didn't start out in that field.
Yeah. Well, health science more broadly has been my passion since I was a little kid, since I was 12, 13 years old. But for the first decade or so, it was very much focused on the realm of athletic performance and body composition. I had been an athlete since I was a little kid, and I was an aspiring bodybuilder. I later became a personal trainer. My older brother was a personal trainer and a bodybuilder, being mentored by bodybuilders. I think you know my older brother, Dr. Yoni Whitten, as well.
Yes.
And um, that was my whole focus is fat loss, muscle gain, athletic performance, and I was very good at that stuff, and I was obsessed with it for over a decade. And then in my mid 20s, something unexpected happened, which was that I got Epstein-Barr virus, and I got mononucleosis pretty severely, sometimes called in other places glandular fever or the kissing disease. And I got the illness itself quite severely for about 6 weeks. I had two golf ball sized white lumps in the back of my throat, pus filled white lumps that made it pretty much impossible to eat food for several weeks. So I was living off broth for about a month. I lost like almost 40 pounds of mostly muscle, and felt awful and was pretty much bedridden and couldn't do anything. And that wasn't really the worst part, though. The worst part was that for about a year after, I was left with severe chronic fatigue. And it was that experience that really was the catalyst for me shifting all of my focus away from athletic performance and body composition and bodybuilding to energy, because I watched as my energy disappeared. My whole life kind of fell apart. Everything in my life, my relationship with my girlfriend, friendships. I was working a hard manual labor job at the time. I was attending school at the time. I wasn't able to do any of it. And, it was like watching all of my hopes and dreams just kind of fade into the darkness, and, wondering if I'd ever get out of that state or if this is now my permanent state. And combined with seeking out a lot of conventional doctors and a lot of alternative natural health, functional medicine doctors, and not getting any help from any of them, it was all, and there's a lot of, I could talk for a long time about all the details of those different things, but that was really the big catalyst for me shifting my focus to, hey, maybe I can, devote all of my 15, at that time, 15 plus years of studying of health science to this issue of chronic fatigue. What is actually controlling and regulating human energy levels and deciding whether we are chronically fatigued or have youthful, abundant levels of energy. And that's been my passion and my obsession for the last decade.
Wow, and you've helped so many people. So you're gonna have to fill us in to what have you found that what are the most common causes of fatigue and this reduced energy?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. So, a lot of within conventional medicine, they really don't know. If you sort of read up on conventional medical notions and literature around chronic fatigue and chronic fatigue syndrome, basically they'll say a lot of things like the etiology is unknown, and the treatments that they offer are antidepressants, a recommendation to walk for 30 minutes a day, um, cognitive behavioral therapy, and stimulant drugs as needed. So you'll notice in that list of four things, nothing is mentioned around, optimizing your lifestyle habits. Nothing is mentioned about nutrition. Nothing is mentioned about circadian rhythm and sleep optimization, the environmental toxicants, so many aspects of the scientific literature that we know we have lots of research linking them with um, how they cause dysfunctional physiology that results in fatigue. None of that body of scientific evidence of thousands of studies is integrated into the conventional medical approach. Within alternative medicine and functional medicine, historically, up until relatively recently, when it's starting to change, hopefully as a result of my input and a few other people's, um, the obsession has been around adrenal fatigue. Everybody's talking about the adrenals and cortisol, and your adrenals get burnt out from chronic stress, and that's the big thing that causes chronic fatigue. And this could be a very long part of this podcast if you want it to be, but I spent about a year, literally a year of my life on this topic. But the very short version of that year of my life is that the scientific literature does not support the notion that adrenal fatigue is the big key dysfunction that's going on in chronic fatigue that's causing these symptoms. It's just not. And the majority of people with chronic fatigue have no adrenal dysfunction or HPA axis dysfunction. So what is the key factor going on? Well, I like to think of energy regulation by the human body as having two fundamental factors. One is basically total body stress load. What is the total allostatic load, total body stress load that your body's under from every source, from poor nutrition to poor circadian rhythm and sleep habits, to psychological stress, to environmental toxicants, and every other type of stressor that you can think of. And that stress load is one big aspect of things. And I'll talk about how it's actually translated physiologically into reduced energy levels. Um, the way that happens has to do with our mitochondria primarily. So our mitochondria are our cellular energy generators. And for many, many years, the mitochondria have been thought of and talked about in, high school and college biology courses as these sort of mindless energy generators. Their job is kind of portrayed as just taking in carbs and fats and pumping out energy. But in the last decade, it's actually been discovered that they have a second role that is just as important as their role as energy generators, and it is as cellular defenders. It turns out that mitochondria are exquisitely sensitive environmental sensors, and they're like the canaries in the coal mine of our body. They're constantly taking samples of what's going on in the body, what's going on in the environment, and asking the question, is it safe to produce energy? Is it safe to produce energy? So the mitochondria are cellular energy generators, these things that are responsible for producing virtually all of the energy for virtually all of the trillions of cells of our body, from our brain to our intestines, to our muscle cells, to our bone cells, to our um, endocrine, hormone producing gland cells. It's all coming from mitochondria. And the, these two functions, energy generators and cellular defenders, are mutually exclusive. So to the extent they are picking up on signals that there is a threat, there is a danger, a stress present in the body. And it doesn't matter if that's psychological stress or if it's poor gut health and leaky gut and toxins leaking from the gut into the bloodstream. It doesn't matter if it's environmental toxicants. It doesn't matter if it's a viral infection. They pick up on those signals. And to the extent they're picking up on those signals, they're turning down the dial on energy production and shifting resources towards cellular defense. So any and all of those stressors are directly decreasing mitochondrial energy production at the cellular level. So that's big key number one. The second big key to understand with what regulates energy levels is what is actually the state of your mitochondria in your cells. And what I mean by that is it's possible to have cells that are either filled with big, strong, healthy mitochondria that are capable of producing lots of energy and lots of them, let's say 2,000 per cell, or it's possible to have cells filled with shrunken, shriveled, fragile, weak mitochondria that are atrophied and very few of them, let's say 500 per cell instead of 2,000. It is literally possible to have those two states in your body. And this is a critically important concept that is unfortunately widely unknown still in the functional medicine, natural health communities. So it's actually been shown in several lines of research that most people on average lose about 10% of their mitochondrial capacity with each decade of life, such that the average 70-year-old only has about 25% of the mitochondrial capacity as a young adult. 25%. In other words, they've lost 75% of their energy producing capacity at the cellular level. This is just to take this out of, these sort of geeky science physiology terms of mitochondria and cellular energy. This is basically the equivalent of going from a Ferrari engine to like a moped engine. Okay. It's a
People feel
huge,
that too. I mean, you hear that, I just don't have the energy like I used to. You hear that all the time. And for people, so many people just accept it. This is the way it has to be. You've gotten older. But the exciting news that you're going to share with us is it doesn't have to be that way. So continue.
and indeed. So people might be thinking this really sucks. I mean, this is bad news, that we lose so much of our mitochondrial capacity with aging. But in fact, when we look at 70-year-olds who are lifelong athletes, exercisers, they have the same mitochondrial capacity as a young adult. So what this means is that the loss of mitochondria, of cellular energy producing capacity, is not just a normal product of the aging process itself, but is actually a product of lack of stimulation of the mitochondria, specifically lack of hormetic stressors in the modern lifestyle. Hormetic stressors being things like exercise, all the different subtypes of exercise, from resistance training to endurance training and high intensity interval training, to thermal stress, heat exposure and cold exposure, like sauna exposure, cold showers, ice baths, cold exposure to cold temperatures, fasting and nutrient cycling. So intermittent periods of going with less food or lesser amounts of certain nutrients like carbohydrates or fats or protein, as well as other types of hormetic stressors like what are called xenohormetic stressors. Certain kinds of phytochemicals stimulate these pathways. Certain kinds of light, like ultraviolet light and red and near infrared light that we get from sun exposure, stimulate these pathways. And breath holding practices as well. So there's a variety, a number of different types of hormetic stressors that our biology and our mitochondria in particular actually require in order to function normally and just to maintain themselves, to maintain their normal healthy state of being a certain size, having a certain number of mitochondria. And the absence of these types of hormetic stressors in the modern lifestyle it basically causes the atrophy and the loss, the death of mitochondria, such that we lose 75% of our mitochondria with aging on average. It's in the same way that if you break a bone, you get a cast on that. And then 8 weeks later, you get your cast off. You look down at your arm or your leg, and it's half the size as the other one because all those muscles atrophied from disuse, literally to half the size. And that happens just in the span of 2 months. So you can imagine what happens if you're not stimulating and challenging your mitochondria for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, right? You get a lot of mitochondrial atrophy, and that's a huge contributor to fatigue.
Wow. So we'll get into more details, but there is a good news then to this. And I know in your book, and we're going to talk about that later, but there are things people can do then. So just as that causes it, right? There's a good part to this.
Yes. Yeah. Well, in the same way that if you have muscle atrophy from your arm or leg being in a cast for 8 weeks, how do you get that muscle back? You get it back by starting to use that muscle and challenge it, and by using it and stimulating it and challenging it to do certain things that are hard for it. And that's a critical key to understand, that it must be difficult for the muscle. The muscle must be challenged. The muscle then responds by growing bigger and stronger. And the same exact thing happens at the mitochondrial level. If you challenge your mitochondria to do certain things, you put them under a bit of transient stress with these specific types of hormetic stressors that I just mentioned, you stimulate them to grow stronger. And they respond in a few different key ways that that translate not only into increased energy levels, but also into increased resistance to a broad range of other stressors that actually translates into resistance to many different types of diseases and extended longevity. You literally slow the rate of aging at the cellular level and extend your lifespan. And there's many, many studies that have shown this. So what the way that the cells in the mitochondria respond to these hormetic stressors is, number one, they grow bigger and stronger in the same way that a muscle grows bigger and stronger. So the mitochondria physically grow in size, which means it's basically like a larger engine, has more little subunits that are capable of pumping out cellular energy in the form of ATP. And there's also a process called mitochondrial biogenesis that is stimulated. That's the creation of new mitochondria, of more mitochondria from scratch. So that's how you go from that state of having 500 mitochondria, let's say, to building 750, or building back up to 1,000, or building back up to 1,500, and so on. And we can do that. That's really good news. You're not destined to be stuck with 25% of your youthful cellular energy producing capacity forever. You can actually rebuild. And the other key aspect of what these hormetic stressors do is they stimulate something called the NRF2 pathway, and they stimulate the ARE, which is the antioxidant response element. And this is our internal storehouse of antioxidants, things like glutathione and catalase and superoxide dismutase. And we can get into a deeper discussion around oxidants and antioxidants because there's kind of widespread misunderstanding about that. But building up this internal antioxidant mechanism is actually critical for defending against every type of stressor that can damage your cells and accelerate the aging process and cause cellular and mitochondrial dysfunction and create disease. So when you increase the cell's capacity to defend against oxidative stress, that helps it defend against every type of stress, whether it's environmental toxicants or a crappy diet or psychological stress or any other type of stressor. If the cell can protect against cell damage, if it can defend itself against that stressor in a way where it prevents the cell from actually accumulating damage, then you are actually slowing down the process of accumulating the damage and the dysfunction that drives the aging process and drives many diseases. So building up the mitochondria and the antioxidant response element is critically important, not only for energy production, but for disease prevention and for longevity.
It's also something that has to do with our bones because inflammation is a major root cause of osteoporosis and bone loss. So
Mhm.
besides we all want to have more energy, it's also going to help our bones. And just what you said about the stressors, the bones respond to the forces placed upon it as well, and it has to be enough. So I think a lot of people can relate what you're saying because it's not like we just do a little bit of exercise and have the effect. So let's get into nutrition because a lot of people think, yeah, maybe the food can make me tired but really, really shed some light on how nutrition can really make or break our energy level because it really does play a large role.
Okay. So in my new book, Eat for Energy, um, the way I break it down is into several chapters, and I'll give an outline of the book itself, and then I'll let you decide which topic we explore. So, chapter one explains kind of what I just talked about as far as the importance of mitochondria in energy regulation. Chapter two is all about the circadian rhythm. This is our internal biological clock. We've got a central clock in the brain that's primarily responsive to light inputs, and we've got peripheral clocks. This is a newer scientific discovery, but we have peripheral clocks, literally like almost clocks, um, in virtually all of the tissues of our body, from our eyes to our brain to our heart to our intestines to our muscles to our bones. They have all of these peripheral clocks, and they are responsive to primarily to food inputs. Um, Chapter three is all about body composition. So, fat loss and muscle gain, the contribution of too little muscle mass and excess body fat to poor mitochondrial health and poor energy levels. And the next chapter is all about blood sugar regulation. And a huge portion of the population is experiencing blood sugar dysregulation, both too high uh, and in many cases too low of blood sugar levels. And both of those are mitochondrial stressors that impact on our energy levels in many different ways. The next chapter is all about gut health. The next one's all about brain health. And then the final two chapters on the book are energy superfoods and super supplements. So there's many different avenues we can explore as far as how nutrition fits into this picture of mitochondrial energy production.
Okay, well, you know what? Let's start with something simple. Because a lot of people say, "Oh, as long as I have my coffee, I'm fine. No problem. Coffee has been shown to help with brain health." A lot of people, because there are certain benefits of caffeine in coffee that people are reading about, and they feel, "Oh, no problem. That gets me through the day." Can you explain why that may not be the best strategy and why these stimulants can, in the long run, not be what we're really looking for?
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great if all we had to do to solve the fatigue epidemic was just take stimulants and caffeine? That would be a pretty easy fix. I'd be out of business. Um, so yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. But this issue is kind of complex and it's insidious in the sense that most people don't actually understand what caffeine is doing to them because it's difficult for the brain to process things based on the time frames of what's happening. So let me explain what's going on here. Um, there's lots of research showing that if you take what are called caffeine naive people, meaning caffeine people who don't normally consume any caffeine containing substances, and you give them caffeine in the form of coffee or caffeine in general, you can show all kinds of different improvements in measures of cognitive performance, physical performance, time to exhaustion in cycling or reaction time, physical reaction time, in terms of energy levels and focus and cognitive performance. And and of course, people feel a boost when they take caffeine. They feel more energy. Um, so all of that sounds really wonderful, and it sounds like, well, that's our solution. It's that simple. It gives you a boost. We've got the science to prove it. What's to argue with? Well, let me explain what's going on. Let me explain how caffeine actually works to do that. So our brain has many different neurotransmitters in it, and some of those neurotransmitters are what are called stimulatory neurotransmitters. They make you more awake and energetic, and drive motivation and things like that. And other of these neurotransmitters are what are called inhibitory neurotransmitters. They're more downers. They're relaxing. They slow things down. They make you tired and sleepy. And the brain is always trying to regulate the appropriate balance at all times of day. And that balance shifts, right? When we're in a waking state right now, we have a certain balance of those neurotransmitters to keep us awake and to make us functional and having this conversation. And then, 12 or 15 hours from now, we'll be in a different state of consciousness and we'll be asleep and we'll have a very different balance of those neurotransmitters. Um, but the key thing to understand is it's trying to maintain the appropriate balance. Now, one of those neurotransmitters that's an inhibitory neurotransmitter that makes you sleepy, tired, low energy is called adenosine. The way that adenosine works, you can basically imagine these adenosine molecules floating around in your brain, and then they lock into a receptor, an adenosine receptor. And when it hits that adenosine receptor, the adenosine triggers a cascade that then results in sleepiness, low energy, making you more tired. The way that caffeine works is caffeine enters the brain and it fits into those adenosine receptors. Only instead of triggering the cascade that adenosine triggers, all it does is just sit in the receptor. It just plugs it up and prevents adenosine from getting into that receptor where it can trigger that cascade. So by blocking a neurotransmitter that would otherwise be an inhibitory neurotransmitter that's lowering your energy levels, it's creating a stimulating, energizing effect by temporarily disrupting that balance that the brain is trying to maintain. Now, if all of that sounds great, and it is great, as I said, we have that research that if you take caffeine naive people, you give them caffeine, you get all kinds of benefits. The problem is the brain is trying to maintain a certain balance and it senses that it's being disrupted. So it senses, we're out of balance. We have too much stimulation going on. Let's bring things back into balance. And then engages negative neurotransmitter adaptations to bring itself back into the balance that it's trying to maintain by combating the overstimulating activity of the daily use of caffeine. And those effects literally take place in about 2 weeks of daily use of caffeine, especially larger amounts of caffeine. So it happens very quickly. This does not take months or years to do. It takes days. So what does it do? Well, it does a couple of things. It increases the amount of adenosine in the brain to try to correct what it perceives as adenosine deficiency. And it increases the amount of adenosine receptors on the brain. So now when that caffeine is not in your system, well, actually it does two things of note. First of all, by having more adenosine receptors and adenosine in the brain, it now takes more caffeine to then plug up those receptors to get a sufficiently stimulating and energizing effect. This is tolerance, right? You're building up a higher tolerance where you require more of the substance to get the same effect. This is why people end up they start with 1 cup of coffee, and then after many years, maybe they're consuming 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 cups of coffee a day. That's what's gone on in the brain. And they may consume 6 cups of coffee and not even feel any effect from it anymore. But all they know is they need that coffee to function. And if they don't have it, they don't function well. And here's why. Because you've got more adenosine and more adenosine receptors floating around the brain, as soon as that caffeine leaves your system, you now have way more adenosine signaling going on than you used to. which actually lowers your baseline energy and mood and cognitive performance and physical performance. And this is why, if you know anyone or if you are someone who is caffeine addicted, caffeine dependent, if you're consuming multiple cups of coffee a day, um, typically those people wake up in the morning and they're like zombies. They're like half awake. Their brain is only half on, their body's only half on. My nanny said to me this morning, she knows she's highly caffeine dependent. She said to me, she comes downstairs, she's totally groggy. She, can't think straight, can't function. She says, uh, she makes her coffee first thing and she goes, I need to go get my brain. That's what she said to me a few hours ago this morning. And I didn't prompt that. That's what she said. I need to go get my brain. And I said, huh? What did you say? And she's like, coffee. I need to go drink my coffee to get my brain. And that's what it feels like. And this is the reason why. This is what's physiologically going on. So just to complete this thought, what you have to understand, what's insidious about this is that most people actually only perceive themselves to be getting a boost from coffee. And they don't understand that it is actually the chronic coffee consumption that lowered their energy levels in the first place. And so what's going on is a normal person can function here in terms of energy levels. And what a caffeine consumer thinks is happening is they think they're going from here to here and getting a boost. What's actually happening is, instead of being here, they lowered themselves to here. And now the boost that they feel from caffeine is actually only taking them back up here, what used to be their normal level of function. In other words, they've made themselves dependent on a substance just to function at what used to be their normal level of energy and mood and cognitive performance. And that's not helpful. This is not what you want. It's actually counterproductive. But having said that, caffeine can be used sporadically, intermittently, in a way that is genuinely helpful. But if you're consuming multiple cups of caffeine, you're doing way more harm than good.
I can totally relate to everything you're saying. Back in my 20s, my early 20s, when I first started working, I was working in a hospital. And as a physical therapist, you saw a lot of patients and you would write notes on these patients. So you were always back in this room with the coffee machine, with their coffee. And so I was up to, not realizing, like 6 cups a day, seriously.
Mm.
And, you just sort of drink it, you write your notes, you drink it, you write your notes. And one morning, and I always had a cup before I'd start work, I had to do a big presentation for all the physicians and everything. And I was late to work. Something had happened and I couldn't have my coffee. I was the biggest zombie. I couldn't function. It was so horrible that I went cold turkey. I said, I am done. I realized I was so addicted and I really required that to function. I couldn't function. And it took around a week. It took around a week of feeling horrible,
Yeah.
with horrible headaches. And then that's been that. But I know it's just it's so interesting how you presented that you're not getting high, or you're just requiring that to get to your normal.
Yeah.
And so for people listening, because that is a big issue, what are your top recommendations on what to do if you are an addicted coffee drinker? Do you have any suggestions where they should start?
Yeah. Well, the very short version is wean off slowly. I wouldn't recommend going cold turkey in general, though it is the fastest way. So if you can suffer through a week or 10 days of feeling awful, um, then it's the fastest way to accomplish it, but it's also the most painful way to accomplish it, as you know. Um, so the way that I would do it is wean off slowly. So you take a week where go from, let's say, 6 cups, if you're just using that as an example, to 4.5 cups. Then take another week, you tone it back to 3, and so on. You keep that progressing over several weeks. You could also do 6 cups, but a couple of those cups are decaf coffee. That's another way of doing it. Um, the Once you tone it back to a cup a day, then you can either maintain a cup a day, and that's a reasonable amount where you're not going to incur too much in the way of negative neurotransmitter adaptations. or you cut it back to using intermittently, using it when you need it. For example, when you have a hard workout, let's say you work out every other day, you use caffeine before that so you get a boost for your workout, or you have a particularly hard day of work, or you're in school and you need to study hard for a period of time, you use it for those moments when you really need it. Um, the other thing to do is to supplement with um, L-tyrosine and L-phenylalanine, which are amino acids that serve as precursors to help increase dopamine production. And by using those, you can help minimize some of the withdrawal symptoms of getting off the coffee. I would also pair it with rhodiola rosea as well, the herb. And that will help boost things as well. Keep neurotransmitters up, so you're not suffering too much from neurotransmitter deficits. And then eat really healthy during that period of time. Give your body lots of sleep and eat extremely well too. And I would also, the other thing that really helps neurotransmitters is actually meditation and things like yoga nidra or non-sleep deep rest. Those relaxation practices have been shown to actually help recharge and restore levels of dopamine and serotonin. So, pairing all of those things together, you can get yourself off coffee dependence, coffee addiction with minimal to no side effects.
I love that. And that's sort of what I do now. When I drive, I live in New Jersey, and sometimes when I drive to New York City and it's a lot of sun or I'm driving home, that's the one time that I will have some caffeine because I don't want to be tired sleeping, but just like you said. So those are so helpful. Thank you so much. The last thing I want to talk about, because we could talk for hours, but I think something that I know you discuss in your book and everything else, and it's so, so important, is sleep and circadian rhythm. And a lot of people get this wrong or just don't realize how important this is. And it's absolutely critical for your bones, for your happiness, really for every aspect of your health. But you want to share some tips on that and why this is so critical to our energy levels and maybe some things that everybody, where would you say people could start improving this? Because it is an
Yeah.
issue for a lot of people listening.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have a central clock in the brain and we have peripheral clocks in all the tissues. The goal that we want, if we want to have an optimal circadian rhythm, is to synchronize the two, to have both functioning optimally and both synchronized to one another. Um, the I'll also mention what the benefits of this are. So rather than jumping straight to the practical strategies, why do you want to optimize your circadian rhythm? So the circadian rhythm is our 24-hour biological clock, and it regulates or impacts in some way dozens and dozens of physiological processes. It impacts on many different critically important hormones, and actually has a major influence on hormones like thyroid hormone, um, leptin, insulin, testosterone, growth hormone, and cortisol and melatonin. Each one of those is really important for many different reasons. Um, in addition, it's also impacting on neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, orexin, which is a neurotransmitter involved in wakefulness and energy, and GABA, which is a neurotransmitter involved in relaxation and sleep and combating anxiety and kind of the racing mind. Um, the circadian rhythm impacts all of those things. So just looking at those mechanisms alone, we've got, joy and happiness and mood and motivation and energy and relaxation with all those different neurotransmitters. We've got hormones like testosterone and cortisol and melatonin and growth hormone and insulin and thyroid hormone that are regulating many aspects of metabolism and energy and mood and libido and cellular energy production and muscle mass and skeletal muscle and bone mass and all kinds of different aspects of our body are being impacted in one way or another by these different hormones and neurotransmitters. Melatonin is also a uniquely important hormone for mitochondrial health. We probably don't have time to go into all the reasons why, but it is the most potent mitochondrial antioxidant known. So it's critically important for protecting your mitochondria from accumulating damage and becoming dysfunctional over time. That melatonin is vitally important. So, how do we optimize our circadian rhythm? Well, the central clock in the brain, we optimize via light inputs, getting bright light in the morning, bright light throughout the day, minimizing blue light exposure in the evenings, darkness in the bedroom, things like that. That's the 20-second version of a topic I could talk about for hours. Um, and the peripheral clocks in all the different tissues of the body, we optimize primarily via food inputs. And one of the most important aspects of that is our daily feeding window, our daily eating window, the time from our first bite of food to our last bite of food. And it's been shown by a circadian rhythm researcher named Satchitananda Panda, who probably wins the prize for the best name of any nutrition researcher, that 85% of Americans are eating their eating window is between 14 to 16 hours a day. 14 to 16 of the 24 hours a day people are consuming food. What's optimal, what we know is optimal from many, many different animal and human studies is between 6 to 10 hours a day. That's how much we should be eating. That's what our eating window should be, 6 to 10 hours. Almost everybody is way, way more than that. And it's been shown in numerous studies in animals and in humans that when you reduce the length of that eating window, you reduce oxidative stress, you reduce levels of inflammation, you improve blood sugar levels, you improve insulin sensitivity, you improve mitochondrial function, you improve autophagy and mitophagy. In the evenings, the breakdown of dysfunctional and worn out cell parts in mitochondria, the rebuilding of new healthy ones, and you improve sleep quality and improve energy levels and many other markers of metabolic health. So that's the single most important nutritional intervention that we can do. In addition, a couple of others are we want to synchronize that feeding window as much as possible to the hours of light exposure. That's how we kind of link up the peripheral clocks to the central clock. Feeding window matches light exposure window. And the other very
Could you
useful,
just say that a little bit? So just maybe explain that, what you mean,
yeah,
a little more detail about that one.
sure. So in other words, don't have the very simple version is don't have most of your food intake occurring after the sun goes down.
Perfect. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah. And most people do. Most people
Oh, those
consuming
evening snacks. Absolutely. Yep.
yeah,
People do that.
most people are consuming over 50% of their daily calories after 6 p.m. So this is not where you want to be for optimizing the circadian clocks. And it's also been shown that um, there's several studies where they've taken usually groups of women in most of these studies who are overweight and they prescribe them equivalent calorie diets. The only difference being equivalent calorie diets and the same exact foods are consumed. And the only difference is whether they're put in the big breakfast group or big dinner group. So it might be a 1,200 calorie diet and they're prescribed to consume a 600 calorie breakfast and a 200 calorie dinner, and whatever the difference is in 400 calories for lunch or something like that, or the opposite. So the 600 calories are for dinner and the 200 calories are for breakfast. At the same exact number of calories and the same exact diet consumed each day, the group that's consuming more food earlier in the day ends up losing way more body fat.
Yeah.
So this is again a result of how it's helping to optimize circadian rhythm related inputs. So yeah, those are some of the key aspects of it.
Oh, those are great. So why don't, again, we could talk for hours, but I want you to tell everyone about your book because they can get so much more information. And I just think it's so exciting because energy is empowerment and we
Mhm.
need energy to enjoy our lives. It's so important. So I just think it's wonderful that you've done so much research and you've put it together in this great book. So why don't you I will have the link for everybody. Was there anything else you want to just say about the book before we
Yeah.
end? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've only touched on a very small portion of what's in the book. So this is kind of just scratching the surface. The book is it's not a bunch of fluff, and it's really, you know here's the direct and simple methods for using nutrition to optimize your mitochondria and your energy output at the cellular level. And I should also mention, it is not a one size fits all diet. It's not a dogmatic diet. It's not an extreme diet. It's not a single diet at all. It's really a set of dozens of nutritional strategies that are presented basically like a buffet that you can pick and choose from and integrate them with whatever your current diet and lifestyle habits are. So it doesn't matter if you're keto or you're vegan or you're paleo or Mediterranean or whatever your thing is, you can still pick and choose and implement these nutritional strategies, integrate them into what you're already doing. And I've put a real focus on how to how to implement nutritional strategies that are um, very easy, like low hanging fruit, things that don't require massive overhauls of your whole diet to adopt some new dogmatic diet. Here's the list of all the foods you're not allowed to eat anymore. And here's the foods that you can eat. And you've got to go get a whole cookbook to be able to learn all these new recipes for this whole new method of eating. It's really meant to give dozens of simple, easy strategies that anybody can do with relatively little effort. And I'll also mention the superfoods and supplements chapter. What's in the supplements chapter alone is worth the entire cost of the whole book, because it's basically like an encyclopedia of all the research related to different compounds that have been shown to improve mitochondrial health and energy levels. And that's information you're not going to find anywhere else. So that chapter alone is worth the whole cost of the book. So it's good stuff, and people can go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble, wherever they buy books online, and grab the book. It's called Eat for Energy: How to Beat Fatigue and Supercharge Your Mitochondria for All Day Energy.
Oh, that's great. And I'll have the link as well in the show notes. And this is how I believe. I'm big into little tweaks that you can accumulate that can really have profound effects. And I've seen this. I've seen this. It's just amazing. One more thing you're doing, you're hosting this great summit that's happening very soon. So can you just share a little bit about the Superhuman Energy Summit?
Yeah. So yeah, the Superhuman Energy Summit is happening very soon. I forget the exact date.
Yes,
It's
it's
happening later
happening
in
actually
July.
next week from when this podcast is out. So if you're listening to this in real time, you still have time to attend the it's hard to say, the Superhuman Energy Summit. So just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've got over 45 speakers, world-renowned experts in a variety of different fields, brain health, gut health, experts in different, sort of cutting-edge technologies to optimize mitochondrial health, and peptides and all kinds of other really cool topics related to energy and mitochondrial enhancement and brain enhancement. So I'd highly, highly recommend people check that out as well.
Oh, well, Ari, I can't thank you enough because your work is really changing lives. It's changing lives all over the globe. And I just wanted to really share this with my community because it's possible. There's so much that's possible, and life is short. And I just believe in optimizing every day. And when we increase our energy, we're able to do that so that we can enjoy our lives. So thank you so, so much for being here and sharing all this wonderful information, and for really putting together the book and the summit, and giving everybody these amazing tools they can use. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Margie. It was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Ari as much as I did, and now have a better understanding of energy and some tools you can put into your life to increase your energy so you can live life to its fullest. I'm very excited about the two resources that Ari discussed: his book, Eat for Energy: How to Beat Fatigue and Supercharge Your Mitochondria and Unlock All Day Energy, and the Superhuman Energy Summit. That's free. That's starting July 11th, going to the 17th. So I'll have the links for both of those in the show notes. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.